Hi, my name is Isaac, and welcome to the latest episode of the Green Left Show. Now, we've got a really interesting episode coming up. We're going to be talking about the ties between Australia and Israel in terms of military ties and the deals that are going on that we don't often hear about in the mainstream media. And to discuss this, I'm going to be joined by Yaakov Aharon, who is a journalist who's been writing for a bunch of publications, including Michael West Media, about these ties and about other things such as the impact of the Zionist lobby in the elections recently and other topics as well. And Yakov is coming from a background of activism and brings a unique perspective to the struggle as a grew up as a ultra-Orthodox Jewish with a pro-Israel education, and he's now doing research into the Israel lobby, Jewish community, party politics, and the arms trade. But before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are recording this interview on stolen land. I'm speaking from the Gadigal country, land that was never ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And also, before we get started, if you like the interview today or any of our other work, please head to greenleft.org.au/support to become a supporter from just $5 a month. It's the best way to help us continue producing content like this. And it's also the easiest way for you to access it as well. So I guess to start off, we've just had an election where Anthony Albanese's Labor has been re-elected. But there's been this kind of constant message from Albanese and other senior Labor politicians that there is no, weapons coming from Australia to Israel. There's no Australian technology being used in Gaza. But you've been researching the ties between the Australian weapons companies and Israel and have identified some of these relationships and kind of the key role that Australia is playing in supporting the genocide in Gaza. So could you give us a brief rundown of the things that you found out?
Sure. Well, firstly, is that I'd like to begin, I guess, with a couple of things. I'm speaking on unceded Dharawal land, which is just south of Gadigal land, Sydney. um, Speaking from Wollongong. Now, my research mostly concerns, insofar as the arms trade, two major players. One, which is Bisalloy Steel, and the other one, Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce. Um, but it is important to note that I'm hardly the only person to have uncovered the really deep military ties between our two countries. Um, Declassified Australia does a really great job. Green Left Weekly, as well, of course, has covered Bisalloy and a range of other companies. Um, Now, with Bisalloy Steel, I got tapped into them because of the local Wollongong scene here. There's continued pickets, community pickets outside Bisalloy Steel, where activists from the Palestine movement are trying to shut them down for a day, and disrupt their business. And it's an ongoing series of pickets. It's an ongoing story. They've achieved many of their goals in terms of you know uh, hitting Bisalloy where it hurts, the bottom line. Now, what I have recently uncovered with Bisalloy Steel was that, firstly, at their AGM, they said that they are exporting to Israel. Now, a lot of people don't understand what this really means, because just exporting between a country, well, it's all just business, it sounds like. But it is more complicated than that, because when Albanese says that we're not arming Israel, I mean, these words have very particular meanings that might fly over our heads. Steel is considered a dual use arm. So, very literally, Bisalloy Steel, by exporting steel to Israel, is arming Israel. And most people think that arms are, guns, bullets, missiles. The definition, according to Australian law, is a lot broader than that. Um, Now, then their imports from Israel are very well documented. Their connections with Australian companies that have, uh, you know, Israeli origins. Rafael Vali Group um, and Elbit Systems of Australia. Very easy to find, very easily documented. Um, and fundamentally, it's the same thing because we are buying into weapons that have been battle tested through the genocide. But what I uncovered is that there are particular exports, and I traced where they're going and how they're found. In 2018, Bisley Steel announced that it has a partnership with Palestine Laboratory, an Israeli company that creates armored civilian vehicles. And their statement specifically included an image that wasn't found anywhere else on the internet as the headline photo. So I did a backwards Google search of that image and I found, well, it's not found anywhere else, but it was actually a collage of three other images. So I did a Google image of those three images separately and I found that it originates on Plasan Re'em's website for particular products that they sell. An armored modified version of the Toyota Land Cruiser 200, another one of the Toyota J79, another one of the Toyota Hilux. In the brochures and the promotional material where these photos are found says that these vehicles have low visibility roll bar for weapons mount, that they have, reinforced armored roofs, hulls, panels, um, doors, windows. The whole thing is covered with armor that's up to 50 millimeters thick. Um, and that, it's ideal for covert special forces operations, that they're ballistically tested by the IDF, that they can withstand 2 hand grenades. And so when you make armored steel, um, that is no longer arms under the Defence and Strategic Goods List legal definition that Australian law abides by. The Defence and Strategic Goods List says, well, this is a level above just arms. This is munitions list number 13 for armored steel. It far exceeds the criteria for munitions list 13. But even beyond that, there's things like munitions list number 6 for armored vehicles. So if you're making parts for an armored vehicle, like armored steel, well, you're not just making armored steel according to law, you're making an armored vehicle. If you're making a vehicle that has a weapons mount, you're now making essentially a weapons mount. These things can't be um, minimized into, oh, we're just making steel. So the standard Toyota cannot withstand the pressure and the weight of a machine gun mounted on the top. And this is very important because with the right modifications, with 50 millimeter steel up in the top and the whole vehicle restructured, modified to just withstand a great deal more by Bislow's armored steel. Well, now it can um, withstand a mounted weapon on the top, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah, 100%. I think what's often lost in the kind of corporate media, mainstream media coverage of this issue is the way that the arms industry is so globalized now. So it's, yeah, of course we're not selling a full Toyota armored car that's shipping from Australia to Israel, but we're, as you said, supplying the steel that is required to produce it. And so the parts come from all over the world, constructed in one country, shipped somewhere else, shipped around. So it makes it, easier for governments to say, "Oh, we're not sending weapons," when they're vital parts of a broader production schedule that goes all around the world. I guess I wanted to ask you there's obviously these ties. There's a lot of has been put about the F-35 fighter jets that were involved in producing parts of. Um, so there's this also goes along with the Australian government wanting to become one of the top 10 arms exporters in the world. So they're wanting to actually increase production of arms, which inevitably would lead to some more arms going to Israel. Is there direct government involvement in any of these ties between the Australian arms companies and the Israeli army?
I mean, of course, firstly is that the ADF imports these Plassandra M armored vehicles as well. So there's a two-way arms trade here on this particular front. Um, and at the time that Bigelow Steel announced that partnership, um, Christopher Pyne was the defense minister, Malcolm Turnbull was the PM, and Turnbull is a significant shareholder in Bigelow, has many millions of dollars worth of investments in it, together with his wife, together with Dave Sharma and his wife. Um, and you know, there's just zero excuse for them to not be aware of this, and they're profiting from it. It's a two-way arms trade, and I think it's really just an open secret in Canberra.
Yeah, definitely.
There's something really straightforward here in that when Alba says that we're not a major player in the Middle East, um, and in terms of arms trade, there's two things to remember. The New Press factory in Newcastle is uniquely geared to produce those parts that it makes. No one else in the world can make them. And the same goes for Bigelow Steel, in that they are the only armored steel manufacturer in Australia to that level of quality of quenched and tempered steel, and one of actually the only ones in the world. So, in other words, if you hear that a tank is completely Australian made, then or a submarine or a navy ship, then without a shadow of a doubt, it is made with Bigelow steel. And that makes Bigelow and Upress major players in the global arms trade and de facto major players in terms of supplying Israel.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing you mentioned earlier was this idea of weapons and arms being, battle tested in Gaza. So effectively, Israel, which is a big producer of weapons, uses them and tests them on Palestinian civilians, and then markets them around the world, including to Australia, as you said, two-way arms exports, two-way arms deals, as battle tested. So this was particularly explored in the recent book Palestine Laboratory by Anthony Lowenstein. Have you found other examples of this in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is one of the really sick things about the occupation of Palestine, because they they put on display the fruits of their war machine, and it's all one big advertisement. So, for example, with the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce, they advertised that an Israeli cyber roadshow was in town, and that all of um, the products were battle hardened, and there was all sorts of AI and drones and um, different products on display over there. When they say battle hardened, what they really mean is that there's a laboratory and its name is Palestine, and the scientists experimenting on the poor Palestinians are IDF soldiers. Um, and they're given this giant budget um, from the Israeli government and lots of funding from their imperialist backers around the world, because it means that then they can come back to the imperialist powers, USA, UK, and say, this works. this is battle tested. And it's a selling point. And when Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce hosted this so-called Cyber Roadshow, um, I mean, it just really speaks volumes about the level of how this is an open secret inside Canberra. I mean, the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce, its chair in New South Wales is Gillian Segal, our special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. And now she's pretty much hired by the government to be an in-house lobbyist on the government dollar for a foreign country, um, while she's also profiting from or organizations she's involved in are profiting from the ongoing war, and then she condemns any protest or political dissent against the war as being anti-Semitic. Um, and it just really stinks.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of touches on my next question because you've also been researching some of these kind of Zionist groups that are organizing here in Australia, and the ties between all these different groups with the major parties, etc. I think this could be a whole other discussion in a future episode of the Green Left Show. We'd love to have you back for, but just on this topic of military ties, is there links between these organized Zionist groups, ultra right kind of groups, and the weapons companies, and how that's all mixing together in a pot?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the main thing to remember is that Gillian Segal and her husband and brother-in-law run a company, property development company, that has given $50,000 to Advance. Now, that puts them up there with some of Advance's biggest backers, namely the Cormac Foundation. Now, the Cormac Foundation was founded by the Liberal Party of Victoria specifically to hold their assets. So, in other words, Advance, their biggest backers are Gillian Segal, the Liberal Party of Victoria, a couple other billionaire um, uh, robber barons, and um, their interests are really very, very far right. Now, um, around August in last year, Matthew Sheehan, the CEO of Advance, he presented a webinar to the Australian Jewish Association, AJA. AJA President David Adler is also on the founding advisory board of Advance. So they were all among mates. And he'd said that, you know, they had, Advance had perfected this campaign infrastructure during the voice referendum. That was when they really came up on the radar of many political operators in Australia. He said, we have created a permanent campaign infrastructure and that platform from which to launch it. So that's a good example where I think the Israel and Gaza issue at the moment is where an issue pops up, particularly for your community, that is the Jewish community, and people think we've got to do something politically, we've got to get active, we've got to get engaged. So they try and stand up to these organizations and they try and campaign, but the problem is that it's actually very expensive to build the sort of infrastructure that we have. It takes a lot of time. Luckily enough, our campaign infrastructure was ready to go. That's a direct quote from Advance. Now, from its inception, Advance said that it was a grassroots, nonpartisan um, organization. Fundamentally, they're far right, billionaire backed group. Um, and their specialty is astroturfing. And what you have with the Jewish community is that they have been organically radicalized by the war on Gaza, the genocide, because our mainstream Jewish community organizations are completely uncritical of Israel. And that's policy that they have, to not criticize what goes on in Israel. So the Jewish community has been dragged along to the far right, um, alongside Bibi Netanyahu. And together with Wendy Bacon, I co-wrote a series of articles. There's more to come on this front about the extent to which these organizations have made an impact on the recent election. We're talking several campaigns north of 250,000. And together with Labour and the Liberals, actually, in some of them, where Labour, I mean, we have sent countless requests for comment to the Labour Party, to Labour candidates, to Tanya's office, to Ron Honig's office, all sorts of Labour officers haven't received one response to these Zionists. I would call them infiltrators of the Labour Party, who've joined for only one reason, which is to drag the party to the right on Israel. And that is Sophie Calland and Ophir Berenbaum, who are perhaps well known to your audience from the Better Council campaigns and from the Cairo Takeaway Cafe stunt. And I mean, there are really serious questions here about why Labor is sitting on their hands and not doing anything, not even responding to comments. When you have Labour members who are active in the rank and file, who are active in their branch, who are active with Labour Friends of Israel, who do things like say that Omar Sarkar, the Greens candidate for Blaxland, should be on an ASIO terrorist watch list. That was said by Sophie Calland in a Spotify podcast, building relationships. And I mean, I think that it's worth asking if this aligns with Labour values. I mean, in Wentworth, for example, Labour had handed out how to vote cards saying to put Allegra Spender number 2 on the ballot. And Sophie Calland was running a campaign saying to put Spender number 6. And when you have a teal candidate versus a Liberal in a place like Wentworth, well, we know the Liberals aren't ever going to do a minority government deal with Labor. And, on election day, people were still talking about minority government being a possibility. So you'd need to wonder to what extent this really undermines Labor's chances of forming a government when, Allegra Spender, we all know, would come to the table for minority government. And does this fundamentally undermine Labor's election goals?
Yeah, it's all very murky, and I'm glad that yourself and Wendy Bacon have been putting the spotlight on this. And I think people should definitely read the articles that are out and look for the ones that come out in the future. Another issue that you've written about is people being recruited, particularly young people being recruited in Australia to go and fight in the IDF in Gaza, including there's links with the Israeli scouts and things like this. Could you tell us what you've discovered about this?
Sure. So one of my early investigations covered this group, Chatzofim, which is the name for the Israeli scouts. And in the 1990s, they, in Israel, formed a joint venture partnership with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, the Israeli Ministry of Immigration, and the IDF's recruitment unit called Metav. And now within Metav, there's a specific unit for the Garin Sabar division. Now, Garin Sabar is a program that provides, I wouldn't say, because I'm not keen on getting a defamation threat, it doesn't necessarily recruit for the IDF, but it provides a whole range of programs and support networks and that are pay for people who join the IDF from Australia and from abroad, and that they market this program to get new people who are interested in joining the army to sign up to this program to enjoy the benefits. So it is a crime to recruit for foreign army in Australia, and so I'm not going to allege that they are committing any crime like that. They're not necessarily recruiting, but it is a fact of the matter that there are IDF recruits, people who are uh, soldiers and recruits as in terms of using the noun rather than the verb. And then the question becomes, well, was there a crime committed? Was someone recruiting them to use it as a verb? Um, and the Garin Sabah program is active in Australia. Its registered address is the same building as the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies and Zionism New South Wales, and the same building as the Holocaust Museum. There's no way that the rest of the Jewish community establishment doesn't know about these groups. They're registered charities, so we know that the government is on top of it. They look through their financials. There's no way they don't know. And that, and to some extent, they are complicit and approve of this because their tax deductible status is ongoing. And the Garin Sabah program provides people who are recruits for the IDF with free accommodation, free laundry, extra pay, extra time away from the army, free plane flights, a total of 3, and a whole range of other benefits. It doesn't end there. When you leave the army, there's scholarships to continue living in Israel, continued subsidized accommodation. But here's the kicker: in terms of it being a crime to recruit for a foreign army in Australia, well, the Garin Sabah program, according to the executive director of the Israeli Scouts and of Garin Sabah, it's the same person and has been since day one. They said that the program begins here in Australia several months before they leave, that people are given Hebrew language classes. They're given classes on how to, I guess, like integrate as a foreigner into the colonial Israeli state, how to blend in, how to overcome the culture shock. And, these kids are being prepared for the IDF here in Australia. And I mean, to what extent are they being persuaded or convinced to join? That isn't for me to answer.
Yeah, fair enough. And yeah, very interesting. I just wanted to touch on this thing that's been a kind of a long-term push from both Zionist establishment and major politicians, is this idea that any criticism of Israel is considered to be anti-Semitic somehow. And as a Jewish Australian yourself, who's been researching and writing and speaking up against Israel and against Zionist project, have you seen much pushback from the Jewish community against the work that you're doing? And how does this kind of conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism as the same thing impact the actual struggle against racism of all forms, so against anti-Semitism and against Islamophobia? Does it actually detract from that struggle? Just interested in your reflections on that topic.
I mean, short answer, yes. But I think fundamentally the question is already misguided, because while it is important to oppose all forms of racism on principle, and anti-Semitism certainly, isn't completely a thing of the past. Um, Fundamentally, there's a genocide going on, and um, I mean, it's there's more important issues at the moment, and when it the worst anti-Semitism I've faced is nothing compared to what Muslims face on an almost daily basis. And you know, it might be comparable to, let's say, what a Greek person faces in Australia or an Italian person. Um, and sure, I oppose anti-Greek racism. It's not, to me, a massive talking point. I mean, the other day I read an article about this AFL player, Alex Pearce, who spoke up for Palestine, and the Age covered it. And to its credit, it seems like the journal was trying to be a bit of an ally to the Palestine cause, because he presented two sides of the debate, which was people saying that Alex Pearce should apologize for causing offense and distress to the Jewish community, and there were others who said, "Oh, we condemn anti-Semitism, and um, Alex Pearce is not being anti-Semitic, opposing Israel is not anti-Semitic." Not once did the Age quote or seek any comment from anyone who was Palestinian. I mean, are they feeling offense and distressed when they open up their social media and see their cousins being butchered on live stream? It's worth questioning if you're actually interested in journalistic integrity. Um, I mean, that's the real both sides of this issue. You want to present both sides. It's people are making the outrageous claim that condemning a genocide is anti-Semitic. Therefore, they're saying genocide is a Jewish value, which is absolutely outrageous. And then on the other side, there's Palestinians being butchered. Um, I mean, if it is Jewish tradition to do genocide, what does that say about Judaism? I mean, the fundamental thing is that Judaism is, like many religions, broad, open to interpretation. Um, it is a changing religion, a changing culture. Christianity is certainly not the same thing that it was 2,000 years ago, just like Judaism isn't. And um, with with Zionism, 120 years ago, um, you had Theodore Herzl writing this essay about this guy called Marshall. Marshall was the um, stereotypical anti-Zionist Jew, and you got to remember that this is in a time when Theodore Herzl was the very first Zionist. In other words, he's less than 1% of 1% um, who actually believes in creating a Zionist state, and he paints the anti-Zionist Jew as subhuman, as genetically different from the Zionist Jew, as a beast. He says they are a people of um, swindlers and cheaters, and he engages in almost every anti-Semitic trope that there is. So he then goes on to say that the anti-Semites will be the Zionists' best friend. Another famous quote by Herzl. So when the Zionists of today say, well, you can't condemn Zionism because that is the broad majority of Jews, I mean, they really got to take a look at their own history. Unfortunately, it is within the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is increasingly becoming formalized and legislated and integrated into universities and workplaces as a working definition for what is and isn't anti-Semitism. It says in the uh, IHRA definition that criticism of Israel is not necessarily anti-Semitic, but being anti-Zionist is, because it denies the Jewish people the right to self-determination. Um, and fundamentally, this is misguided because, I mean, no one would say that denying, let's say, the Assyrian people the right to a state is anti-Assyrian. Um, and not every people deserve a state. I mean, there's questions about the extent to which the Jewish people are a nation in that sense as well. But then there's also simply that that right to a state does not override the Palestinians' right to a state in that same land. And what Zionism is really a zero-sum game, especially as it is today. There's the Jewish state law in Israel passed in, I believe, 2017 that says that um, self-determination within the borders of Israel is exclusively the right of the Jewish people alone. And it defines those borders as um, including everything between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. So opposing that cannot be anti-Semitic. Um, there have been 1900 years. There have been many hundreds of years where Jews existed without even an idea of what Zionism is, and there'll be many hundreds of years after Israel is internally collapsed, where Jews will continue without this sense of Zionism being integral to our identity.
Yeah, thanks. That was a pretty good, thorough explanation. And yeah, we're very much sick of the anti-Semitism being used, or the claims of anti-Semitism being used as a cover to support the genocide. Um, Speaking of, like, we're at this phase now where the genocide's been going on for about a year and a half. Obviously, it's been a much longer time than that Palestinians have been continually dispossessed from their land. But this kind of escalated genocide that we're in, there's at least 60,000 people killed, including tens of thousands of children. There's likely a lot more people dead than that, according to the Lancet, the medical journal. Right now, there's no aid being allowed into Gaza. So there could be, there's millions, hundreds of thousands of people starving. So we're at this kind of critical point where, we've been protesting, trying to build this kind of Palestine solidarity movement here in Australia, and similar things happening around the world. But something struck me that you were saying earlier about the weapons ties, where there are these critical points where, like, Bisalloy Steel, the only place that's producing this armored steel, and the New Press factory in Newcastle, and there are these critical sites where that could be targeted to have an impact on, obviously not stopping, but slowing down, or at least impacting the Israeli army and the genocidal assault. I mean, they're threatening to go into Gaza with a ground invasion soon. So how can people get involved, I guess, particularly in the campaign around Bisalloy that you've been closely following? Or how can people, I guess, get involved more broadly? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's important to realize what we can and can't accomplish. I mean, if you're living in Newcastle or Wollongong or Whyalla, Geelong, you are close to certain factories that are major players in the arms trade with Israel. And with Bisalloy, for example, if you shut down their business for a day, that could easily mean one less shipment comes out on time of armored steel for Plasan Rehem, and that could mean one less tank in Gaza, one less armored vehicle, and that could mean one less dead Palestinian kid. So it's very important to keep in mind the direct connection that in this globalized world, nothing is really all that disconnected from one end of the globe to the other. That all of our actions really do have a direct flow and effect. And it matters what you buy. It matters who you sell to. It matters what type of laptop you're using, if it's a Hewlett Packard one or not. Um, and you know, in line with the calls for boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, we need to be smarter about where we put our money.
100%. I guess, is there any kind of final comments you wanted to make? I was also wondering what's the best way for people who, if they want to find out about your work or read, some of your articles, how can they find that?
Well, the large majority of my work is found on Leica West Media. It's also been republished by Green Left and published on Independent Australia. I am a freelancer, so I will be branching out sooner or later. I'm actually fairly green to journalism. I've only been at this for about 6 months. I think my final thoughts would be to when people are mobilizing others, speaking to others, trying to get them more involved, it's really important that we don't just talk about what's going on in Palestine as something detached from what's happening here. It's important to always weave the threads that connect us as Australians to what's happening there, to make it clear that actually, despite what Albanese says, we are players in that war. That our day-to-day actions do have an effect, and that this can get much worse very, very quickly, because if it explodes into an all-out regional war with, let's say, Iran, you can safely bet that America will be dragging us into this as well. That our ports, air bases, and the strength of our alliance with the US will really be tested and pushed to extremes, because just like Iraq, we will be going in there. So there is a risk of it getting much worse and becoming much more of an Australian issue.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Yaakov. It's been really insightful, and I hope people watching this have found it useful and are able to take away some of the lessons from this to the campaigns you're involved in across the country. As I said at the beginning, if people enjoyed this episode or want to find out more about Green Left, head to greenleft.org.au, and you can become a supporter from as little as $5 a month. We don't take any kind of corporate sponsorship or advertising, so your support is the only way that we can continue doing this work. And thanks again, Yaakov, for joining me, and hopefully we'll be able to do a follow-up interview with you at some point as well.
Thanks, Isaac.